So, I saw Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, which just came out and is the third and final installment in the new Star Wars sequel trilogy. And I am a giant Star Wars fan. I have been a Star Wars fan since I was a kid. Before I saw this movie, I've loved every single Star Wars movie. Like, I've either from nostalgia or just from being a great movie or an entertaining movie. And I was super hyped for Rise of Skywalker. Now, weirdly enough, this review is not going to be as overly positive as I really anticipated. Honestly, watching this movie, I was super surprised in so many ways. First off, I do not dislike this movie at all. I don't dislike it. I feel like I've only seen it once so far, but I feel like it's growing on me more. But as is on this first review of it, I thought that this movie had a lot of problems. And I will do a spoiler video as well whenever I watch the movie a second time. But as for the first time I watched this movie, like I said, I've loved every Star Wars movie. I've loved them all. I think that they're all entertaining in their own right. And rewatching The Last Jedi is my favorite. And in terms of filmmaking alone, that movie is fantastic. And going into this movie, I understand the fact that Rian Johnson made his own creative vision, whether people like it or not. And The Last Jedi is a movie that is still being talked about. So whether you like the movie or not, I love the fact that the movie has lasting power and debate. I think that is great. And going into this movie, you had J.J. Abrams with Force Awakens, then you had Rian Johnson do his own thing in The Last Jedi. Then you have J.J. Abrams return after Rian Johnson did all these things that were different. And now J.J. Abrams has to do course correction and reworking the plot of The Last Jedi into this movie because I don't think it's because people didn't like The Last Jedi. I think honestly it's because J.J. had this vision that he wanted to make this certain movie his. He wanted to make this ending his ending. And with Rian Johnson's film, he really couldn't do it in that way. So it's very interesting watching this movie because I'm going to start with my problems first, and I usually never do that. I usually talk about the positives first. But the problems I have with this movie on first watch is that this movie is very, very safe. As opposed to The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, whether you like it or not, is a movie that sparked discussion, debate. It sparked something that made the movie memorable, even if you like it or not. It is a movie that people still talk about. And I love that fact of that movie. And this one, there are some things that I've really loved about this movie, but I felt like this movie overall is definitely not as good as The Last Jedi, in my opinion. That's my favorite Star Wars movie on rewatch. But this one is, in terms of script, this I think is literally the weakest script in the whole franchise, in any of the live action films, because what they have to do in this movie is condense a 4 or 5 hour movie into 2 hours and 20 minutes. And it feels that there are a lot of moments where there are characters that will want to describe something or have an arc with saying something, and they'll say it later, and they don't say it later. Or characters that are just kind of there basically in a basic fashion. Like, for example, and this is all spoiler free, but whenever they meet the characters on the horses that you've seen in the trailers, they've got basic connection to these characters, so you should feel like you should care about them, but it's very basic. It's really not very slowly done in terms of character progression. A lot of these characters that are new are just here, just introduced, and then that's it. They're introduced and you should like them. And I felt like every other Star Wars movie, whether you like or dislike any of the Star Wars movies, they were never rushed in that fact. There are a lot of new characters in this movie, and they've got the basics, so they're in the movie, but they're not developed in a way where it feels like it's actually legit. And this movie, just the way you look at the structure of this movie is not structured very great. It's very weird in how haphazard it is, because The Last Jedi didn't give any real answers to, in Force Awakens, what JJ put, like who's Rey's parents, and like they had stuff like that in Last Jedi, but you couldn't tell if it was the truth, or you couldn't tell if it was something that actually progressed the story, which I was fine with because I loved the characters in The Last Jedi and their progression, even though it didn't further the story, but it furthered the characters and the depth of the characters. In this, you have to introduce all these new characters in a 2-hour, 20-minute movie, and this movie just feels so cluttered. It's so weird how cluttered this movie is. Like, there are so many times where all these new characters appear, and they're very, very on-the-nose basic. Like, and I know Star Wars is a franchise of characters that are simple and are basic, but it really annoyed me. And it's a very much a MacGuffin movie in the script. There's a lot of things where it's like, we gotta find this, we gotta find this, we gotta do this. And I think I heard it very well from a lot of reviews, particularly Phantom Entertainment's review, where Dan Merle was talking about that the first like 45 minutes is like the second movie to this first movie, where like you have introduced all these MacGuffins, and you have to have all this happen when it wasn't introduced in The Last Jedi. And it's very interesting. It's very weird. And it's very much a J.J. Abrams thing, where like it's like, oh, we gotta find this, we gotta find this, we gotta get to this guy to get to this guy. And it feels kind of like it's wasting time. It doesn't feel like it's giving something that makes the story further. It's really weird, because Star Wars, I feel like all the other films, everything they introduce in the movies, it furthers the story, and I feel like this doesn't for like a while in the movie. The first hour, first 45 minutes, it's a lot of like treasure hunt, and it doesn't really amount to anything at the end of the movie, really. It's just they get these clues to get to these clues, but like it's not much that really changes anything. And so that is one of my biggest things. This movie is so rushed and so cluttered and so safe. And it's a safe movie, which, I mean, I understand Star Wars is usually like that anyways. Like Force Awakens I love too, and that's very simple as well. It's a very simple, back to basics original trilogy lovers movie, where like it's not the prequel, so like Force Awakens is where people try to get people to come back for the love of Star Wars. And it's a simple movie, and this I feel like should have been, like, it is a simple movie in a way, but it's very complex, because the characters are very simple more than any other Star Wars film. But it's complex, in which you've got all these MacGuffins you gotta find, but they don't really amount to much. And then you've got all these new characters who are barely there, who have little screen time, but then by the end it really doesn't amount to much. And I feel like any of the other Star Wars movies don't really do that. Like, this is the one where I really was just kind of annoyed with it. And it's so sad, because I love Star Wars. And again, I don't hate this movie, but it's weird. The critic side of me is appearing in this. Whenever this movie happened, I really felt like a critic. And I try not to feel that way. I always feel like entertainment comes first than critiquing a movie, because I feel like if I'm always critiquing something, I'm never going to fully love something. But this movie kind of broke me, and I felt like I needed to critique it. And again, this might completely change on my second watch. This is only my first watch I'm watching of this movie. I've only seen it once. I'm again going to see it and do a spoiler review on it. But watching it, it's just so interesting in how cluttered and how simple but complex it is. And it feels like the whole movie is not... Like, it's so weird, because any of the other Star Wars movies, I feel like there is true soul in any of the other movies. In this one, I feel like there's not much of a soul to it. It really feels by the numbers, because of all the issues they had to make this movie. And I feel like Disney probably rushed them out to make this, because, again, there are a lot of moments in this movie where there are things that are just held to the side that you think are going to get developed, and then they don't get developed at all. And Star Wars usually does a great job at that. It's so weird. But I'm going to stop being negative. I hate being negative, and I really don't want to be negative on a franchise I love. But this movie is my least favorite on this first watch, my least favorite of the Star Wars movies, I think. And it's really sad because it's the third film. It's the culmination of the Skywalker saga. But it really, in some ways, bothered me. But I'm going to get into my positives now. I want to be positive. I really loved Rey and Kylo Ren in this movie. I thought that they were great. I thought that this movie, like the last two movies, Rey and Kylo Ren are so interesting and so great in this film in particular. Whenever you realize Rey's lineage, it actually is shocking, and it works very, very well. And I think it really is a great reveal. And I think that Kylo Ren in this movie, like he was in Last Jedi, is evolving more into a character that you really root for and care for. And even though he's a villain, even though he's a bad guy, they really do a fantastic job of building him up. And building Rey up with realizing what she is. And I really love that fact. I think that's fantastic. And so I really love those two characters. And really, honestly, now that I think about it, everything else is just kind of basic. Like, I don't know. I really loved Rey and Kylo Ren. I really loved the twists of this movie. I thought the twists are great. I liked Palpatine in the movie. I thought he was good. I enjoyed seeing him back. And I enjoyed the last act a lot. Honestly, like, the more I'm complaining about the movie, I think it's more like the first 2/3. And I think the last act I really loved. I really loved these characters. I really loved how the story is resolved with these characters. I really loved that. I loved the ending, and I loved Rey and Kylo Ren. And the score was fantastic. But besides that, I don't know. It's so weird. I'm honestly at a loss for words because I didn't hate this movie or even dislike it. I was just so not interested in it, and I've loved every other Star Wars movie, and you think this would be a movie that I would just immediately fall in love with, but on this first watch, I really didn't. Besides the great final act and the great moments with Rey and Kylo Ren, I thought that the rest of the movie was just really forgettable, and it's really sad because it honestly breaks my heart because I'm such a gigantic Star Wars fan. I've been since I was a kid. And again, I'll watch this again. Maybe I'll feel different. But as of this first video review for this, there are things I love, but honestly, a lot of it's forgettable. It's really sad to say. I'm really, really ashamed as a Star Wars fan. Just because I love Star Wars, and I'm so sad that I didn't love this one. So, yeah, that's my spoiler-free review of The Rise of Skywalker. Tell me down below what you guys think of the movie. I'll do my spoiler video sometime in the near future, maybe in like a couple days after I rewatch it again in the theater. But as of now, that is my first thoughts on The Rise of Skywalker, and thank you guys so much for watching.